Rabbi Ron Li-Paz. Season 2, we're done. Total 29 episodes over 2 seasons. That's how many hours do you think that's equated to in production time?
Oh, it's a lot.
It's a lot of
more
hours.
for you than me, because I get the hour in the studio and you're doing the work afterwards, all the post-production. It's a lot.
Takes some time.
Yeah, but you know what? It's because each one is unique. It's not like it's I don't know if it would be different if we were doing a series on TV where it's a prolonged story.
Yeah.
Each one is attention grabbing, for me at least, because it's unique. And then we go to the next guest and something else that's unique and interesting, sometimes pivoting to a completely different area of meaning.
Yeah.
And what meaning looks like. Sometimes I found, I don't know about you, but sometimes I find that, meaning mindset, well, yeah, that's so clear in this episode in terms of how this person is living their life, what they're pursuing. And in others, I'm listening and going, okay, all right, I see I see how meaning becomes a factor in a life well lived. And in one case, in a very complicated life, somebody who lived a horrific life. And according to his own account, this is Jonah Li, the former gangster, enforcer for the Gambino crime family, claims to have turned his life around and become a public servant. That's interesting, regardless of what our feelings are about what came out in that episode or what we've read and know about him.
Yeah, I think what we talked about in season 1 in this conversation, I want to say a year ago, but it seems lifetimes ago, is we were developing and are developing the concept of the show in real time, because we find a guest, their story interests us, and then somehow in the edit we like, oh, okay, that still falls into the overall scope of the show. It feels like it's an anthology. Obviously, we have a completely different story every time, but like any good series, it follows the same plot, essentially the same core values, and follows the same meaning. So I think that's interesting, because ultimately we're all trying to find our own connection to the stories, and that brings us to the overall theme, hopefully. Otherwise, they're just interesting stories.
Yeah, it reminds me of Doug Mankoff from Echo Lake Entertainment, and in that was one of the more recent episodes. And Doug was talking about what interests him as a filmmaker and TV maker, story creator, is somebody's story changing, is seeing somebody go through a character arc, seeing somebody progress in their character. That's always interesting to him. I think that's always interesting to us as well. And again, I come back to John Alite or any of these other people. When you see somebody, Victor Tabush, this incredible episode that I found so fascinating, knowing him so well, but I just so enjoyed how he relayed the lessons he's learned as a man growing up in this world. And he's traveled to over 100 countries. He's done extraordinary things in his career, and he's learned a lot and journaled a lot and had a lot to share that was really valuable.
And I think one of the things that connects a lot of these people is these small scale stories, meaning a man living his life that has a bigger and bigger impact. The ripple effect of what he does is very large. But at the end of the day, it's just a humble story of a man going about what he's passionate about.
Yeah, it reminds me of our first episode of this season, which was with the operatic megastar Angel Blue. And I remember Angel's publicist, Hannah, saying to me on the phone before we would meet Angel, she said, just need to tell you, Angel sometimes gets very emotional. I hope that's okay for the podcast.
And we went, no.
We don't want
Send her home. We won't do it.
We want stoics only.
Yeah.
And what struck me about Angel was not only her relationship to God, that was apparent from first thing she said, but also how she feels her artistic life is in service. And I think that sometimes I'm just imagining a 19-year-old watching the episode who says, I really want to become a fill-in-the-blank opera star like Angel, sing in every opera house in the world, or a kind of Taylor Swift kind of figure. They're all the same thing, right? Megastars, iconic performers. And Angel's lesson is a lot of hard work, a lot of travel, and a deep commitment to a God-centric life, to being of service, to realizing that in every performance, she's not alone. That's her feeling. She's in service. If I remember correctly, she said, I think I asked her about singing the iconic role of Aida at the Metropolitan Opera. I said, what's that like? And she said, well, I do the work, and then I say to God, now it's yours, basically. I'm misquoting her. But basically she says, I'll do all my preparation, and then I have to let go. And that's, faith in God, faith in self. That's, to me, an interesting story.
Yeah, I was I'm listening to the audiobook of John Cleese right now, and he said growing up, going through John Cleese, for those who don't know, hi, amazing British television and movie and theatrical actor who pretty defining of a time in television that still has influence today. And he said he still gets horrendous nerves, but he has autopilot, that he knew growing up and that he was going to fail. He was going to fail, was so fearful of hearing, such and such's reaction back home. But he just would click autopilot and afterwards kind of go in awe at what just happened.
Oh, so, autopilot meaning just step onto that stage, do your thing.
Saying if I did the work enough and I put in the time, then I could just step away and essentially let my autopilot take over, do it, and then I could go back to being nervous me, which I liked.
Does he refer to it as autopilot?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I think it's interesting the different takes, call it the secular and the theology-based version of the same thing.
Yeah, it also, that draws me to, we had a great artist, Steven Silver, and he's a great proponent of creativity, obviously, not just his own art, but animation. I'm looking at the books here that we have of his, and so many things we see on television that are animated that he's done, created those characters. And he said something in that episode of, who says a dog can't have 8 legs? Right? This is art.
Yeah.
Right? This isn't going to be pooping on your lawn. This is art. Who says we have to be constrained in our creativity? Let your pen, let your pencil create. Let your mind, your heart create. That's a great lesson for all of us. That's a great episode as well. Fascinating guy. Great conversation.
It's trusting yourself enough to let your autopilot or your faith go and take the wheel.
What was your, we had a number of people who are in entertainment. I'm thinking about Amy Berg right now, who created so many documentaries, Academy Award nominated documentaries. Now, I think her latest movie, I'm sure it's going to get nominated, maybe win Best Documentary. It's extraordinary. It's Never Over, Jeff Buckley. What did you get from that episode? What fascinated you or what captivated you in it?
I think her energy, to be a proponent of something like documentary filmmaking, which we're so familiar with seeing, the big stars and the big directors for fiction, but we don't really see the quote unquote big stars of documentary giving interviews. They don't have the social media followings that Steven Spielberg would have. Actually, I have no idea what Steven Spielberg's following is or his engagement, but her energy and commitment to her craft and just being totally transparent with the origins of the passion of, the documentaries, the projects she did. It was very interesting. And I think just admirable. Not to say there's anything at all wrong with fiction. I feel like fiction's the wrong word, but
it's filmmaking,
with
standard
the fiction filmmaking.
Yeah.
But I think there's an element of humility that comes with documentary.
Yeah, and vulnerability.
Yeah.
That I don't know if it exists in the same way when you're producing a scripted show that's, not based on reality.
Well, you don't get the same handprint on it, I think.
Right.
It's such a bigger thing to create a blockbuster cinematic universe to make a Marvel movie as compared to a documentary about a musician you're passionate about.
Yeah, something that really struck me about her is that she has a great documentary. I think it's on HBO or Netflix on dogs. Loved that documentary. And then she's done some documentaries that are so dark and painful about abuse in the church, about, some really, really difficult subject matter. And I remember in the episode we talked to her about how long she stays with a subject. Sometimes 2 years, you know. That's a long time to stay in such a dark place when you're pursuing a story where there really is no light, but you made a commitment to it that you're going to stay with it to the end. And I think what I admire most about Amy is that she feels, and she came out of film. I mean, she came out of news, right? Mm-hmm. She was a journalist, investigative journalist. So I feel like she has the commitment to bringing darkness to light. We need to know these stories, and in order to better our society and ourselves, this is my read, and therefore she feels committed to bringing them to the screen in a way that's artistically beautiful also. Yeah.
I think a theme, obviously, which naturally comes up due to what you do is theology, is religion. I wanted to focus on that for a moment because I think there's when you see a podcast, blah, 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 with enter theological figure, religious leader, it will either isolate you by just saying that's not for me. It doesn't matter what the beginning of the sentence was. The end is enough to say, I'm not engaged.
Yeah, it's the last words on the mug, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, got it.
Or you immediately go towards that because it doesn't matter what the beginning thing is. I trust what the character at the end is going to be able to tell me and teach me.
Yeah.
I want to ask you to explain in a way that you're not explaining to a kid, but really just explaining to you or explain to me what being a rabbi is to you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I want to go back first to the fact that the smallest print says with Rabbi Ron. The meaning mindset, color, and then with Rabbi Ron. And it's not even on the screen, by the way. And I think that is a certain discomfort because it is saying, I think I have something that's universally important and appealing, which is by virtue of relationships that I've developed, I can bring certain people to the conversation. And even in a solo episode, we've done a couple each season, I might have something worthy of your time and attention. And if I ever give it a reference, the rabbis, the Talmud, this, that, fine. I'm pretty sparing with that because this isn't a Jewish podcast. It's a podcast that's, hosted by a rabbi. So I think I want the content to be forward. When I have some of the people that we've had on, the privilege that we've had, I don't want to take a chance to the degree that I have a choice that I alienate somebody from hearing that because I say I am fill in the blank, right? So that's my feeling. Somebody else might say, you should be proud, put that first, Rabbi Ron's meaning mindset. Okay, fine, it's a choice. I really want to, and I think my whole career in many ways has been about being accessible. We used to have, when you were a little kid, this is my son, by the way, we used to have a neighbor next door who was an Orthodox rabbi, a member of Chabad. And he, beard, white hair, this kind of thing, maybe not so white in those days. He said to me, you're going to reach many more people than I will. Rabbi, right? Over the fence, talking to each other often. And he said, you're going to reach so many more people than I will. And he wasn't lamenting that. He was just stating a fact. Look, just based on his look, right? Yeah. He's only going to attract and appeal to a certain audience. And he says, you as a rabbi, there's almost a limitless audience to what you have to share. So I try and stay somewhat aware of that, but also try to use that as part of my mission in this world. Okay, if so, then what do I want to do with that? It's like if somebody places a microphone in front of me, then I have a real responsibility. I want to go back to your question about being a rabbi. I think it's hopefully leading people toward self-betterment. I'd say in relation to God, but my theology, my view of God is God's less interested in God than God is us, interested in us improving this world.
Yeah. I'd love to read you something.
Okay.
Just get your thoughts on it. Because I think it affects how people who are watching the show, but also I think more importantly, people who are engaging with you on the program react to you.
Okay.
Definition of a rabbi. One would be a teacher, a life guide. Two, a story curator, which I think you are the embodiment of. A community shepherd. A moral first responder. A crossroads companion. And a values translator. I feel like each of those has I can think of specific stories and interactions that embody those so specifically, and so accurately. So I don't want to waste too much time on it, but I think it's important for you to be able to tell the audience what your perception of your role is in relation to them, because I think that's an important relationship.
In relation to the audience?
Yeah.
Well, I've never heard that as a breakdown of the definition of a rabbi, but there wasn't one piece of it that I couldn't relate to in terms of what I do and what I've done. Every check mark, check mark, check mark, check mark. Being with people in crisis, leading people, shepherding, all that. Teaching, the embodiment of rabbi, meaning my teacher, the word. I feel like the world is dark in many ways. I'm not a pessimist at all. You've known me your whole life.
You are not a pessimist.
I'm the eternal optimist.
Yeah.
But I feel like certain people, and my choice is to be one of the people who gets to walk through the forest at night with a lamp, hoping that if I do, with that lantern, some people might not stumble and crack their heads into the trees.
It's a great analogy. Yeah, I love that. So then I think your role in a podcast like this, which I think we all are aware, there are plenty of podcasts. Yeah, everyone.
More than 3.
Yeah, there are more than 3. Everyone and their uncle has a podcast. But I think what makes you different as a host is that you're bringing, first of all, who you are to a podcast, which is just genuinely, and you're an evangelist for curiosity. So I would say you are, first of all, not just curious on your own behalf, but you're curious on behalf of others. And you want to spread curiosity as a tenet that everyone should live by. And I think that curiosity ultimately leads you back to the core of this podcast, which is, I'm curious at why your story, X, Y, or Z that you do brings meaning to your life.
Yeah, I feel like I am a bit obsessed with curiosity. You know, in psychology right now, there's a term called intellectual arrogance. Mm-hmm. And there's another term, I'm sure you know, called intellectual humility. And you can't be intellectually arrogant and be curious.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think intellectual arrogance is, I know. No, I've got this. I'm right. I know the answer. I have this locked in. And what it does is it creates judgment, obviously. Whereas curiosity doesn't allow judgment in it. You can't be curious and judgmental at the same time. So I feel like that's something that I'm trying to work on with myself and advocate for.
Yeah, and I think you do it very well.
Thank you.
So circling back to the podcast itself, not why we do it. I have got some notes here because I am not my father and I can't retain the entirety of human knowledge in my head.
Entirety of my knowledge.
There are a few episodes this season that I think stood out, and there's also some episodes that really connected to season 1 as well. First of all, obviously having Carl Honoré on again. Yeah. Who we love Carl, and I think hands down, any season we do, he will be in my top 3.
Yeah, me too.
The leader of Slow, who talks very fast. Yeah. The irony is not lost on us. And one of the episodes that obviously comes to mind with that in season 1 was Vanessa May.
Yeah, talking about the loss of her son.
Loss of her son, and then Izzy from this season, literally losing part of his body and maybe a bit of his faith in humanity, and then regaining that and then some. And then we have Jonah Li-Paz this season, another very heavy one. What do those episodes bring out in you organically in that conversation? Do you know what those episodes feel like retrospectively?
Yeah, because they're all pretty present for me. I think Vanessa has a lot to teach about grief, and that's what she's doing with her life. And I'm not sure that her episode is getting the number of views yet that it deserves to get. And maybe that's because some people are just terrified of that subject. They'll skip over that one. They might even be into the podcast, but go, oh no, I can't do this.
Yeah,
I can't do darkness of that kind, meaning finding that your child has passed away. And I understand that. But nonetheless, I think she had a lot to teach regardless about how to be with people who have suffered loss. even if the loss isn't your own. I learned a lot from her. One of the things that, I'll leave it at that with her, just to urge people as an act of human loving kindness to watch that episode, because we owe it to each other to have a better degree of care and more sophistication in how we care for people who are suffering loss. Izzy Ezagui was a guy from Florida, grew up Jewish in Florida. And as he said, something that struck me was that he said, in my childhood, I'd hear about and in my teens in Jewish school, I'd hear about the suffering of our people, and that was in ancient days. And then he realized, he kind of came to this awakening saying, wait, my people are still suffering. And they are. And that's when he decided to become a soldier, and he went into war and got his arm literally blown off his body. And we've all seen versions of that in movies, right? We've seen Full Metal Jacket. We've seen these kinds of war movies that are telling us something about what might have happened to some people. But here's the guy sitting here with an arm missing, talking about how he's living his life in the aftermath. And I'll tell you honestly, if I'm troubled by one episode and one guest, it's from this season. It's Jonah Li. And I read his books. I was really, honestly, stomach-turning reading the violent episodes in the books. There were certain things about him that I found so abhorrent. And then we made a decision after I heard him on the Michael Smerconish show on the radio. Eli Honig from CNN was hosting, and he brought on his friend John Alite. And I listened to John being interviewed and thought, wow, these guys are friends. I need to take this guy more seriously and consider him as a guest. And then I read a couple of his books and read about what, the brutality. And the fact is that if I'm somebody who believes in human redemption, the idea that people can change their ways, even from doing horrific things, and if I believe that the ultimate judge of our actions in our lives isn't in a courtroom or each other, then I have to say he's a worthy guest. Yeah. Because here's a guy who says, I killed this number of people, not killed, murdered, let's be clear. And I think the number is probably smaller than the actual number based on everything I've read. I mean, I think he killed many more people and was complicit in the deaths of many other people, not just the people he hit with a bat to the head. But he says he has undergone a process of redemption. He's found God. Okay, we've heard various versions of that story, in and out of prison stories, crime stories. And he's gone to helping kids to say, wait a second, you're at a turning point. Let me steer you in a better direction than I traveled in my life with the choices I made. And now he's a councilman on the East Coast. So I just have to say it's not up to me to judge him. Hopefully there's something to be learned from his story.
Yeah. And, the whole point of programs like this, beyond just having conversations and delving into our own curiosities, is ultimately to learn something about betterment, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
And about meaning. What's the point of meaning? Identifying what means something to us is something we can lean in towards and hopefully shape the rest of our lives. So if he can help someone find their meaning and point them in a good direction, then as far as I'm concerned, he's on his way to at least helping make amends for what he's done.
Couple things that come out for me. I remember asking him, how do you sleep at night? And he says he doesn't sleep well. He has all these memories. He can't rid himself of those memories. I said, what do you tell your children? And he says, I tell them everything. He said, some mobsters or ex-gangsters don't tell their kids. They don't want them to know who they are. He said, I want my kids to know who I am. Now, one of his daughters, or his daughter, died of fentanyl overdose. I saw comments. People said, well, karma, right? Not my business to declare that right or wrong. Not my business at all. But he certainly suffered. He also talked about the fact that he wanted to better himself, wanted to change his life. Hopefully a person watching a podcast or listening to it when they're watching somebody who is devilish in terms of what they're doing, really horrific, or what they did, doesn't necessarily see that story as theirs, let's hope. But we all have something that we're trying to change in ourselves. And here was a story of a guy who said, I reached a crossroad and I made a turn, and I'm still on that path. And every day of my life, I'm intentional about moving forward. That applies to all of us.
And if that's genuine, which I do believe it is, then that's as much as you can ask of anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think any of us believe, or I hope that most of us don't believe that you're locked down with any action you've done in your past. I think to a degree, separate from legality, separate from, real life consequence, we have to be able to move on and hopefully, if not just grow ourselves, grow others. So that's the goal.
Yeah, I think my discomfort with him and people of that ilk is that they're making money on that too, right? Whether it's books or movies or baseball bats signed is something to me that I go, okay, well, all right. Again, it's not my business. It's my business to put the story out and ask what I think are probing questions.
Like I said, a curator of stories.
Yeah.
I think that's, I keep glancing down at my list here, assigning different stories that we've encountered through this program, nearly 30 episodes, which is unbelievable, to these bullet points. And, that's what the program's about.
Yeah. I want to talk about Carl. You mentioned Carl Honoré, and if people see up there, I'm not sure about the angle, they see one of his books, which is called In Praise of Slow. It got republished In Praise of Slowness.
Boulder here too.
Yeah, Boulder. God, Boulder was great. These were great books. In Praise of Slow, we're talking about slow food, slow sex, slow society. Just, our assumption is faster is better. That's progress. Anything that's better means it's faster, like internet speed. And some things are great, like internet speed, but a meal might need to be slowed down. Something Carl was talking about is the idea of breaking bread together, right? That idea that it's meant to be done together, right? We're meant to be eating together, having conversation. That's very Talmudic also, this idea that, a meal is wasted unless you're in good conversation. So being in your car while eating your food probably isn't the intention when it comes to slow eating. Boulder was, wow, I think it's a great book. Do you remember we talked about a chapter in the book where he talks about wanting to understand at his age what it feels like to be considerably older than he is. He's in London where he lives, and he goes into an institute to put on an aging suit. And he said it's not so much as a suit, but layers. So first they put a layer on his neck, and then they put a layer on each shoulder, and then the arms. They piece together the new version of him. And then he says in the book, he said, we get to a point where they say, now let's address your hearing. And he goes, hearing? And then they put earmuffs over him to diminish his hearing. He hasn't lost his hearing, but it isn't what it was 10 years earlier. And then his sight, and they give him like a menu of 5 different sight ailments, and he chooses glaucoma or something. Then they put glasses on to where he can see what's in the center, but not what's peripheral. And then the woman says, all right, let's go for a walk. And he gets out into the world, goes through, one of those revolving doors.
Yeah.
And he says, normally those are kind of fun and interesting. Just time it and you're through. Here, he said it was scary because I couldn't move fast enough with my new aging body to necessarily not get smacked in the head or the ass. And he said, and I got out to the street and people were moving faster. And I realized I was in people's way because I just couldn't move quickly enough. And I got to the curb and I had to cross the road, and there was traffic and there were people, and I had to really navigate through the world. And that was just one little piece of his story. He also talked about extraordinary people who are living great portions of their lives in later years as we're getting, to live longer and longer. Well, what are those years going to be like in terms of romance, in terms of creativity, productivity? Really inspiring.
Yeah. There's a lot of good stories that have come out of this season. And last season too, I think you could build a book off of the curated stories that we've heard.
Yeah, I think so too. You should do it.
Out of the two of us who's going to write a book, it is not going to be me, although I might read your book. Just looking here at some of the other episodes.
Yeah, I just want to touch on Dr. John Whelan.
I was just going to say,
Whelan.
yeah.
He's somebody I know.
Total departure from the structure we're used to with filming this.
Yeah.
An amazing guy with amazing stories and just amazing insight for a part of us as humans that we are just completely unaware of.
Yeah, when he and I spoke that episode about sudden onset obsessive compulsive disorder, sudden onset, what does that mean? And he was talking about PANS and PANDAS, terms I wasn't even aware of. There's so much that he is working on and studying that's so fascinating. He's testified before Congress on the COVID vaccines. Mm-hmm. So he was a really interesting guest. I think at the time when he was in here, you may have been remote from Lithuania.
I was.
I think you were producing from across the world.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
We've done a few of those. We've done a few where suddenly it's, all right, that's my time. I got to go.
Right.
Let me have a laptop next to me in the road and listen in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of fun. And we've done that both seasons. And speaking of both seasons, it was a pleasure to once again have in Pastor Grace Park and Stephen Carr Rubin, Rabbi Stephen Carr Rubin.
That was great. Yeah. Pastor and Rabbi.
Very timely.
Yeah, and they both, she'd lost her church and he'd lost his home in the fire in the Palisades. And these are just good, sweet people leading at a time when they're struggling, which was interesting in itself.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway from that episode is planting your faith, whatever you call that, in people, not in buildings, not in objects. And that's something we all struggle with. And I think that kind of mentality applies to a lot of the stuff we experience and a lot of things that the stories we've heard through this program is really believing in people and in ourselves.
Yeah, and what ultimately matters. You're making me think about the two solo episodes.
Mm-hmm. And we haven't even gone to those.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Bessa, right? This Albanian word. And I threw that out there as a solo episode because, I think sometimes something can click with people and maybe become viral in the best sense. The people can go, oh, here's a story from a country I might not find on the map unless, of course, they would, Albania. And here's a story I didn't know. And then what I tried to do with that is say, if a single word could have that kind of impact on an entire country, as small as that, but an entire country, what could we be doing more effectively in our societies, communities, and countries?
Yeah.
How can a value start to actually stand for more? And the last episode that we did before this one, so episode 14, season 2 of The Meaning Mindset with Rabbi Ron, I'll just hold the mug up again, was in light of, or in the aftermath of the assassination of, what's that?
Not in light.
Yeah, in the aftermath of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I felt like I needed to say something. I knew what I wanted to say. It certainly wasn't to eulogize Charlie Kirk. Plenty of people would do that. It certainly wasn't to criticize him. Plenty of people would do that, nor to extol his virtues. This wasn't my place. My place was to say, societally, what do we need to look at this moment and understand? What do I see that we could learn from this moment? And what I saw, what I broke it down to, were 5 crossing points that occur. And I was trying to say, if we can identify what happens, then we can get ourselves away from the ultimate, which is violence. It's like you could take what I was teaching and bring it to the micro, down to a marriage relationship, and see how it gets to anger, divorce, or God forbid, violence. But here's societally what happens. And what I did was I took the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and I really talked very little about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I talked about what happened in Rwanda about 20 years ago that was so despicable and devastating, and something that I think was a parallel between the two occurrences.
One of the things I like about this program, and obviously applies to many more out there, is you can take 30 episodes, including this one, and really study it as a lesson of humanity and how to be good and how to grow and how to handle loss. There's a lot here.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And ultimately, that's not a testament to, how well we do a program, we make a podcast. It really just shows if you listen to people.
Yeah.
You take time to listen to 30 people's stories.
I agree with you. I feel comfortable saying, I think this is a great episode to people, or I think you'll love this, or I think that's a great podcast. Well, I don't know that I'm saying that, but the reason I'm comfortable is it's really not about me.
Yeah.
And it's not about you. It's about, we're the host for a great conversation. And one thing I learned from you by episode 2 or 3 was shut up and listen. That was important. Meaning, Dad, you talk too much, you interrupt too much, let them speak. And I thought, oh, okay, stop, listen. And part of that was the discomfort of doing a podcast for the first time, season 1, first couple episodes, which is I need to be thinking what my next question is.
Yeah.
I don't do that anymore. I study the person, their book, whatever it is to know about them, and then sit in for the conversation.
And when it comes to talking to people and really just listening, hopefully that's the goal. Another couple people who we had on who were really amazing. Their stories were, I think, influential to what the season became. One very close to the beginning and one towards the end. We had Ron Margaliot, who came in, I think he was episode 4, I want to say.
Yeah.
It seems like a lifetime ago. Tell me a bit about that episode.
Yeah, it's inspiring. He was a cyclist, and he was an international cyclist from Israel. And he realized with all the trauma going on that he could turn cycling into therapy for kids. And he would take underprivileged kids of all different races and ethnicities, Arab and Jewish, and Bedouin as well. And he'd give them a bike. And now they had to be responsible for the bike and to be on a team racing. And he said what you'd see, the development of these kids going from individuals to members of a team, helping each other up the hill on these big races was extraordinary. So I really admire him for taking a passion and turning it into something that's outwardly focused and helping young people. And Faina Kukliansky is the representative of the Jewish community of Lithuania and of Vilnius, the capital. And I think she has a difficult job. I think her job is to represent a people who are still to a degree living in the aftermath of the Holocaust, because you can't be in a country like Lithuania, certainly as a Jew, and not feel the presence of the loss there. And she manages that and manages the blossoming of the Jewish community that's there. That's her responsibility. And she has the difficulty of dealing with the politics of it all, working with the government and trying to get the right compromises for projects that don't always work well. I mean, it's just a difficult situation. She's also an attorney and has been fighting for reparations and rights for Lithuanian Holocaust survivors for decades.
So that kind of takes us to the end here. I do want to do a little rapid fire here.
Okay.
Ask you a few questions, off the top of your head. Most unexpectedly moving guest this season? Because there's a lot.
Angel Blue.
Yeah. And her agent told us it might get emotional, and it was for all of us.
Yeah, her publicist. Right?
Yeah. All right, next one. Best producer Ono. It's something that I did that...
I can't think of any. Can you think of any?
On. Yeah, I can think of one.
Go on. Give me that one.
Actually, I don't know if I want to say that because it kind of involves Gusta. It kind of involves my wife. I don't know. I guess I'm clean and clear.
I think you're good. Yeah, you've got a job.
One idea that changed after we hit stop. Something that you learned, some idea that was changed.
I think I was thinking more and more about Victor Tabush and the idea of the things you don't have to do anymore at a certain point in life. A different kind of bucket list.
A disagreement we had off mic.
I think yes. I won't talk about the episode, but we had one that we were saying, does this work? Does this fit? And we have several of those out there in the ether, and we'll decide how we work with them.
Yep. Before
we talk about, just briefly, the next season, What are you listening to? You listen to a lot of podcasts. What are you listening to and loving?
I mean, I actually had a dream, not last night, the night before, I think it was, about meeting Malcolm Gladwell on the side of a cliff. And I don't remember what we were talking about, but him and his producer were recording an episode on the side of a cliff, and I passed by and went, no way, and stopped and pulled over and told them about our program. And then I think the dream ended. So maybe they didn't like it and cut it off. But I'm always listening to anything Malcolm Gladwell comes out with. Yeah. I actually have started listening to some of our guests being featured in other things, which is good and a good education as well, just on how other people have handled these guests and the questions they're asking. Like I said, I'm listening to a book written by John Cleese right now that's interesting because it's totally separate. I like anything to do with psychology and, why we are who we are. Yeah. So I won't plug any more than that because now I can't think of anyone I'm listening to.
Well, I'll plug Revisionist History. Malcolm Gladwell's great. A more political, interesting one for me is called Call Me Back with Dan Senor, S-E-N-O-R.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about that.
Great podcast. Books that I've read. Wow, I've been reading so much that's so good, and in the just general category of great fiction. The Lincoln Highway, Gentleman in Moscow, and Rules of Civility are all by one author, Amortal's incredible books.
See, this is why he's the host, because he has recall that I don't.
3, that's
I'm the behind-the-scenes guy.
Yeah, there have been some great books, but those and anyway, I'll leave it at that. But reading constantly, as you are, reading constantly. I'm more and more concerned about the news that I'm reading. What's bothering me is I'm not opening up a newspaper. None of us are. So we're reading news that's curated for us, and I don't trust that process anymore because I know that it's algorithm-based. So I'm getting stories that seem to be tilting toward things that would interest me, which means I'm not getting a wide enough array of ideas and opinions.
Which is ultimately the point of news, is to be educated.
Yeah, shock me, interest me, absolutely.
There's also the fact that for print, you have to print. So there's a time that's spent curating, editing,
and saying
reviewing,
done, final.
Then final. Whereas now, for better or worse, the second something happens, you have a bunch of people texting from their phones into an editor or tweeting directly, which, Twitter X is now I think the number one globally consumed news source.
Yeah, how incredible.
Which is, I don't know for better or worse.
Well, for worse, because a lot of it isn't news and it's false. And I'm seeing more and more AI-generated imagery that is perfect. I mean, it looks so good. Yeah. And I saw something today that has 5,500 comments, not views. And they're all commenting as if it's real. And that should worry us.
Yeah.
Anyway, about next season, I think we have some great guests who have committed to season 3, so I'm looking forward to that. And this is a privilege. I love hosting these conversations.
I always love
collaborating with my son.
Likewise, not my son, but I always love how you start every episode, every intro with some version of "I'm humbled, I'm grateful."
It's a privilege.
It's a privilege.
Yeah, it really is,
and it is. It's a privilege for me to be a part of it, and I hope listeners get as much out of it as we do.
Yeah, one thing I'll say to our audience is we'd be grateful if you enjoy this podcast, if you would share it with people so that more people can get the content, because that's ultimately what matters. Not like we're earning a dime from it. If you would share it, like it, comment, because we want to see what's striking you, whether you're in favor of it or not, right? If you disagree with a guest or a question, let us know. Use the comments and let's start a conversation and hopefully share this and make it something that continues.
And if we started off by saying that, listening is how we grow, we're doing the conversations for you.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
See you next season or after this.
Yeah, for dinner.
This season is produced and edited by Jonah Li-Paz. Content editing by Bronwyn Li-Paz. Musical theme by Amots Plesner. Logo art by Janice Rodnunski. Graphic design by Gusta Li-Paz. Social media management by Morgan Shanahan and Sophie Bergeron. The Meaning Mindset with Rabbi Ron is hosted by Rabbi Ron Li-Paz. Find us wherever you find your podcasts.